here's a very common one. You buy a lot, and they do have these now. They have HOAs and associations for homes, not just condos, that
Mhm.
restrict the selling of properties. So you can't. So for some, a lot of them have ordinances now in certain areas where you can't sell more than 25% of the property at a time. So what if you're not on the list and you want to move?
Welcome to Lux Talk, where we talk purpose, positivity, and all things luxury. I'm your host, Lisa Berg, and today we have with us Hillary Johns. Hillary is a trial attorney and the founder of Hillary Johns Trial Lawyer. She has extensive experience in civil litigation, employment law, and business disputes. Operating out of California and New York, she provides strategic legal representation for businesses and individuals focusing on complex litigation, negotiations, and risk management. Welcome, Hillary.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much for coming on today. It's so exciting to talk to you. So, tell us what kind of began your whole experience and tell us about your journey into trial law. You have years of experience and over 100 cases taken to verdict. Tell me how you started this whole story.
I started this whole story when I was a kid. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I would became a grown up and then what would pay well. And I looked at lawyers, and my dad and my godfather were lawyers. They didn't do trials, and I started watching Perry Mason. Is a very common story. And then, and then, but in those days there weren't too many women, involved in law. But I saw Della Street, and then L.A. Law came along, and this was something I thought I would be. It's a question of whether you're going to like it too. A lot of people see a profession and they go, "Oh, I want to do that," and they realize what's involved. So I just, I was a professional athlete for a while, but I always had an eye towards law school and becoming a trial lawyer. And I started trying, and I found I was winning a lot. And I was very fortunate early on to be work with firms and mentors who were very supportive and are still good friends and got me into trial law. And I really enjoyed it. And then it was a matter of picking markets and subject matter that you like. Like I did, when my early on in my career, I did a lot of family law and criminal defense. I don't want to
Mhm.
defend criminals. I didn't like that. I didn't like being around criminals. I think everybody has a right to due process, and divorces weren't really for me. But I picked these areas of employment law and business disputes and real estate. And now and I just, I really enjoy that part of it. A lot of there's a reason cases don't always go to trial. People don't wanna take the risk, the lawyers don't wanna take the risk, and we're the firm that people call when, like, "This case is going to trial. We need someone there who's got experience, who wants to be there, is comfortable there, hasn't isn't ground out about it." I think people have a right to access the legal system and a right to assert their rights, and, how many times have we heard that story, particularly in, the older it wasn't so long ago that people, were wronged or had, didn't get their rights asserted just because they didn't know what to do, they didn't have the right advice, they didn't have someone advocating for them, and I think that I know this sounds a little corny and cheesy, but I really do believe it. One of the things that makes this country great is we have trial by jury.
Mhm.
Our peers get to
Right.
decide this and present this, and any other country in the world, and we have an international practice, they don't have this. And this
Mhm.
is really one of the foundations of our country, and I think it's a really important part of it, and I feel very honored to be a part of that, and I think, I've met a lot of other attorneys who are very committed to the practice of law, and so sometimes it's tough, the courts in LA are clogged, the Bay Area, they're setting out 2 years from now. New York, is a little more efficient because it's a smaller state, but all these people have rights and things that they want asserted, and I think it's good that we live in a society now where people from different economic backgrounds and personal backgrounds can come to court and get a fair thing. And a court is you don't always know what's going to happen, but to some degree, it's a safe place because there's justice and the laws that are designed to protect you. And or we're in a tough spot, or companies. We often get this, with as you do all things luxury. Often people who can afford that lifestyle, who can afford those things, are targets. And
Mhm.
they need someone there advising them and knowing that, because I've seen this, and particularly higher end or wealthy individuals are just terrified of, what this is going to do if someone goes online, if someone does this. A lot of persons with means are very private people. for good reason. They know that, unfortunately, it's a reality of society. If you have a lot of money or you have money or financial means, there are scammers, there are con artists, there are people who are gonna wanna take that, and, it being a lawyer for persons in those positions, is important because they're advising you throughout. They're helping you achieve your goals and your privacy or building a legacy, or maybe you're doing investments or building your brand or your company or diversifying. And getting sued or having to sue someone, sometimes you do have to sue, can be a real asset to that. So, I think
Mhm.
all persons, that have any kind of investments or business tricks should have a lawyer advising them. You often hear about the family lawyer. We're often serve in that context too. We're advising them in all things business, or this is what
Mhm.
you need to do because, you know, when you're running your own business, Lisa, you need to be out there marketing, being seen, making deals,
Mhm.
producing your product, whatever that is. And you don't have time to
Right.
sit there and worry about the legalities. You need someone who's going to tell it to you straight, tell you what the risks are, you'd let you assess it, and you can make your own business decision, and you're knowing that they're there. And one of the things we do that I've seen most successful lawyers do is when the phone calls, you pick up, or if you're on the phone, you call right back. We're not one of these firms where we're so important that it takes 3 weeks for you to get an appointment. It's not like that.
Mhm.
And that we give personalized attention. And clients need that. They're launching into markets, they have accessibility demands, they have the customers they have to deal with, the vendors, all these things, the finances of it. They need someone they can rely on, and we play that role
Mhm.
often. So sometimes it
Mhm.
doesn't go to litigation, we're preventing litigation, when they get a demand
Right.
or a threat, or, it's often the threat of litigation that often
Mhm.
hooks these people in, and it starts the panic and the concerns and things like that too. So we help them with everything from insurance to negotiations to agreements in place and protecting your intellectual property, protecting your
Mhm.
brand. What is that going to mean there? Those are the things that I would think a lot of your listeners are looking to do because they want to make sure that, well, wait, I thought we had a the handshake deal doesn't work anymore. I wish it did. No one to fold them. You're excited about doing a deal and the energy's there and you're loving it and you're really into this. And then you realize there's a backside here that, they didn't mention. Okay, I can't tell you how many times this has come to litigation where you're getting along great and it was okay at first, and then you realize these things and, hey, that's not how it went, and, the person realizes their bank accounts have been emptied or they're making a claim for their intellectual property or half their client base has got customer lists have been stolen. There's the defense, well, it's public information. These things happen, and in the luxury market, I'll tell you, if you're doing well, other people are gonna wanna do it. They're gonna wanna want, "Why is it you, Lisa, and not me?" "Why is it that
Yeah.
person is doing so well?" And this is a subject of a lot of litigation, and it's a lot of things you can do to protect your brand, your assets, and your future, and your growth, and your reputation too, because
Absolutely.
if you're in litigation,
Right.
what a good lawyer
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. No, it's always nice to know you have someone strong and powerful in your corner to help defend you, for sure.
It does. Whether you have
For
to ever
sure.
call them or get a reality check, we do a lot of reality
Yeah.
checks. We do a lot of reality.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, can we talk protecting your luxury assets and whatnot? From a legal perspective, what do you think's the biggest oversight investors make when they're, like, acquiring high-end luxury properties?
I think there's a few. One, you need to look at the history of the asset and do your due diligence. We have seen this a lot in the LA area. I've seen it in the New York area too, where, some of them are more historic buildings, but they don't do their due diligence before they purchase. So they don't really know what they're
Right.
buying. It is with consumer, the everyday consumer, and it is with luxury items. The financing and things, of course, but I think you really have to look at the property and its zoning and have a contractor go through there and make sure it's really suitable for your needs. I mean, that is the number one thing.
Mhm.
And making sure there's no restrictions on it. We've seen
Mhm.
this. There's the increase in HOAs and neighbor zoning, things like
Mhm.
that. What are you buying this luxury for property for? That happened in Palm Springs. Everybody went out there during the pandemic and they bought a bunch of properties, and now they're limiting what they can do for Airbnb. So they're sitting there.
Right.
They're sitting there. because most people don't want to live there year round because there's just not but they'll go there, so you need to check those and you need to take a look at those. And a lot of people, here's a very common one. You buy a lot, and they do have these now. They have HOAs and associations for homes, not just condos, that restrict the selling of properties. So you can't, so for a lot of them have ordinances now in certain areas where you can't sell more than 25% of the property at a time. So what if you're not on the list and you want to move and you're paying on a mortgage, you're paying on 2 or 3 different mortgages and you're like, look, I got to unload this property. I'm just paying.
Right.
No one's there. I'm paying, the property taxes alone are more than some people, certain in luxury properties are more than most people pay on a mortgage in several months. So, you got those kinds of situations. So you need to really take a look at that. If you're, and it depends where you're located. For example, the East Coast has a lot of older buildings. Southern California, for example, tends to have a lot of newer construction, and it's just because of the space. If you're looking at buildings like that, they may seem very romantic, but is this a money pit? Are you going to be able to tear it down? You know, are there going to be problems from the neighbors? Things like that. And you need to look at
Yeah.
your neighborhood because they have some luxury, really nice mansions. Really nice. I mean, just who wouldn't want to
Mhm.
live there, right? But then you've got these grandfathered in neighbors or other issues. So you need to take a look at your neighborhood. Have there been problems
Right.
there? And for a luxury home, for example, in Beverly Hills or Bel Air, you've got the looky loos, Lisa. Do you value privacy? Do you want a tour bus coming by? Did they stop? Are there people there with cameras? I mean, are
Right.
you okay with having someone in your space because public streets or public whatever, I mean, there are people
Right.
who will go through garbage, Lisa, because they think maybe you're someone famous. I was having lunch with some friends, and I have a good friend of mine who's a very famous person now in his field, but I knew him when I was a teenager. We went to school together. We've been friends, for decades. And he got in the car and was doing something. We were talking. I go, "Why don't you just take?" He goes, I go, "Why don't you just come with me?" And so he wasn't. Sometimes people come up to him, but but to see the Uber driver's reaction when he found out he was famous, these kinds of things. And, then he was bugging me after I dropped him off, and if you want privacy, maybe that's not a thing, if you're not a famous person, but you're a very wealthy person, because often, someone, for example, who's a very famous actor, that's a common one, may not be as wealthy as the person who built several companies, has
Right.
diversified investments. But do you want cameras near your home? Do you want these kinds of things and security? And, do you want to be near something like that? So do your due diligence of your neighbor, and often it's hard to find out because most people, a person who's famous or high profile is generally going to buy a property in a trust. So it's not their name. They're the trustee and the trust, but the trust is buying the property. So, yeah,
Right. Yep.
and there are rules about that too, where you can have the name, you know, omitted or hidden because for, if you're a high profile person. So those are considerations that you need to think about. I mean, these are the same things that you're going to think about really for an everyday person. Are schools safe? What kind, is there crime in the area? These kinds of things you need to take a look at because you're a different kind of target when you're in buying luxury real estate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like you hit the nail on the head, do your due diligence, right? Like, how much do you want to be in that environment or not? Because, I mean, it's your home, it's your space, it's your workplace, it's everything. You want to really think that through before making big decisions like that.
Yeah, exactly. And there's the obvious safety aspect too. Systems. And we've seen these things
Wow.
happen. Another thing you have to be careful of, make sure you check people's ID and credentials. I have seen this scam where wealthy people come in and they're buying a home where they have a property manager and someone else comes later and says, "Oh, we're going to we're going to fix your whatever it is, or we've been called or, it's something like, cuz often people hire property management companies to maintain their gardens or whatever it is. Make sure those people are who say they are. This is a very common scam, and they can go right in, they'll grab your jewelry, they'll grab whatever,
Wow.
and they'll clean you out. I have seen this happen, and it is an invasion of privacy. It is very scary. God forbid, I've seen instances, unfortunately, that has ended in people being killed because they come home early. So, these people are just, these people, don't let the cable guy in unless it really is the cable guy, or we're checking everything in the area, really. Can I see your
Right.
ID? I'm gonna call. don't let people into your home, even if they say they're working for this company and you know that they've been vetted because, and if they haven't, make sure they have insurance.
So, as an employment law expert, what are the most critical legal protections needed, you feel, to safeguard a growing business? What can people do to really safeguard themselves?
Have your employment agreements in place. Make sure that you've checked on a person. Make sure they're signing things. Make sure that in any employment agreement, you have something that protects your intellectual property. So, people cannot solicit, people cannot, non-solicitation agreements, client lists, anything that is your property, make sure you're protecting it. So, and also make sure that what's called a work for hire, meaning anything they develop there, because often what will happen is, and we'll see this often, say someone's got a great marketing idea or a great logo or a great brand or a way they're doing this, they'll start saying it's their idea. So any kind of
Mhm.
trade secret, your marketing, all those kinds of things, client lists, you've got to protect those because people always say, oh, no, we're good.
Yeah.
It's fine. An NDA, you should know an NDA is not going to protect you against any kind of illegal or criminal act. So it's going to essentially be voided
Mhm.
when you're discussing those. It can help you though when you're growing your business. Say, for example, you're in touch with high profile persons or very wealthy persons who aren't they're wealthy, but they're not in the public eye. For example, you need to have something in termination claim or anything like that. They're out of line. You need to have a code of conduct. I'm not a fan of
Yeah.
employee handbooks because if they're not out of date, they can be used as evidence against you later. Make sure they get your
Mhm.
sexual harassment prevention training. Every People miss this. So basic. And it's not expensive. It used to be all these companies were trying to sell you these really expensive classes. We teach them too for clients. As a courtesy to clients, we will teach them. But you can go online for an hour or two. It's non-supervisory 1 hour, 2 hours for supervisory. Make sure they take it in their current on that. Make sure you have a policy in place that if there's a complaint, there's a
Mhm.
safe place to complain. Look, if you think your boss is a bully and the person you report to is the boss, they're not going to do that. They're not gonna say, "Hey, I think you're bullying me. I think you're" you need to have a safe place. Also, just remember to list the EOC and the DIR, California Department of Industrial Relations there, so they have a place to go, because one of the number one things when people get sued, they go, "I complained to someone and they were part of the problem, and I didn't know the other resources to go to, so I had no one to talk to. So you denied me that. You not only did this to me, you denied me that right." And we represent a lot of businesses, and we're seeing a rise in this because California law right now, New York, not so much. New York tend to be where people are fired for cause. They've had misconduct. They've done terrible things, and they're still suing and getting settlements because a lot of the personal injury attorneys started doing, wage and hour claims, all these things because they know it's lucrative, it's statutory, and the cost of defense is more than is more than they wanna be paid, and they know this, so it's a whole market.
Right.
Is it right? No. Also, really seriously consider insurance. It's called EPLI insurance, Employment Practices Liability Insurance.
Okay.
It's not cheap, but it's become more affordable. It used to be, it's like, "Oh, dear God, I can't believe it costs this much." But you might wanna consider if you have employees having this insurance. And so if you get a claim, you have a defense, it's paid, things like that. It's a good feeling if you have the right kind of insurance. It is. And
Mhm.
we do a lot of that. One of my colleagues here used to be in-house counsel for an insurance company. So we review their policies and tell them often, okay, here's the coverage you have. Review your insurance policies because a lot of people, oh, I have coverage for
Mhm.
that. I'm like, are you sure? Did you read your policy?
Right.
The broker told me. Okay, well, what the broker told you and what the policy says are two different things. What did you actually sign? And a lot of people are shocked to say, "Oh, I don't have a copy of my policy. I don't know where it is. Oh, I let this lapse. Oh, I don't have this kind of coverage." I'm like, okay, well, you had coverage for that. You had coverage if someone slipped and fall, but you don't have coverage if someone claims they were assaulted on your property by you. That it's a different, or gets a wage and hour claim. And people, they get the policy, they never read it, they just assume it's what it is, and they have no idea what their insurance says. And, you also have to look at, deductibles, retainers, how much coverage do you really have? Some of these
Mhm.
policies will give you a few $1,000,000 in a certain kind of insurance and 25,000 for another, and you didn't read them and you don't have do you have your endorsements attached to your policy to say what you actually have? You need to keep those, and you need to make sure that your record keeping is up to snuff. because a lot of times I see this, they're like, oh yeah, we have that somewhere, or they started small and they grew big, and so they had these arcane record keeping practices. Also, I would be very careful about who you make sure that you allow access to your payroll. We have most people don't. We've seen this where employees get disgruntled because they don't think they're getting paid enough, and such is getting paid more than me, even though they have, you know, widely different jobs. So you need to be careful about who you let have access to that. Because
Absolutely.
once you do that, you're giving them control to that information. And, it
Mhm.
may when you're busy, it's easy to say, "Okay, could you just do that?" But you've just given this person access to your bank account records,
Right.
your maybe checks, access to private employee information about their Social Security numbers, what they're getting paid, where they live. And I'll tell you, a person can fall in hard times. Addiction, major, major
Mhm.
issue. We know this. Mental health problems. It's another problem because you never know. But, if you're seeing these things, employees, you need to have the good sense to understand that, and it's,
Mhm.
things like that you're seeing on social media. Also, you need to be aware that, some people depending how big your company is, may have other issues. Say a person becomes obsessed with a colleague, is texting them after hours, has maybe asked them out, but is too
Mhm.
persistent. You need to be able to take the temperature of your company and know what's going on, not just what they tell you is going on. And there
Right.
needs to be a system in place to address it promptly.
Mhm.
These are things that can. I have a case right now where there's a threatened lawsuit going on, and there was a thorough investigation conducted. And I've taught these classes. I teach clients too. We do this for them. They're like, the behaviors you're describing, like, I've seen stuff like this. I know what you're talking about. And so people know. And once you have that, you've lost them. You're not going to get them back. You're not. I mean, it's just, you're not.
No.
You
Yeah,
need
no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and it's another thing to say, I have seen this where someone has pulled something like that, and they deal with it promptly, and the person's out of there or they're reprimanded, and I've heard the thing, "Oh, they were just transferred to another unit. They didn't do anything." They just said they did, but they didn't, as opposed to the person maybe should be fired because they put their company at risk and your brand
Right.
and all those things.
Yeah.
And, like,
Yep.
and letting the person know, "Hey, how are you? And we're here to support you," is a big deal. And I can tell you it makes
Mhm.
a lot of difference if you say
Oh, 100%.
if they give lip service or they actually did something about it. And they say, "You know what? It was awful that it happened, but, they dealt with it and he was out of there. And I have confidence in this person now." And, things and it
Mhm.
helps your brand because if
Yeah, absolutely.
God forbid you ever get sued, you can say, "Have you had any other instance?" We did, and we got the person out of there. This was, you can honestly say, instead of saying, "I don't recall." Of course they recall. We don't believe this. But things like this in the employment law context, that's where you really get into these areas. And playing hands off or
Mhm.
making jokes about it is not helping. You're not helping yourself. You're not, or ignoring the problem, and doing these
Yeah.
things. And believe me, particularly in smaller companies and things, people notice when saying, "Oh, such and such did anything," and there was no consequence to them. The worst part of it is the people who have
Yeah.
no consequence to them, the people who did it know there's no consequence to them. The people who saw it, even you, because the witnesses are victimized too. Even if it
Yeah.
wasn't directed at them, they're going, "Yeah, they're not. It's like that."
Absolutely.
They know that no one's going to do anything about it. That's not
Mhm.
good for you. That's not
No.
good for your company or your.
'Cause it instills a fear in them that they're not protected, right? Like, even if you're a bystander watching it go down, you're like, "Whoa," I mean, rightfully so. You have to protect your company for
Yeah,
sure.
and what's gonna happen later is someone may come along and file that suit or go to Variety. But you can protect it. You can feel a lot better about it than having your butt hanging out because we've even seen this in companies, billionaires can lose everything, almost everything. I mean, this can happen. It's
Yeah.
trillionaires, I don't know, but maybe in 20 years we're having a different conversation, but, yeah, sometimes there's not enough wealth to protect you. There's just not. And,
Mhm.
you have to live with,
Yeah.
what you've done here, and some people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those in the employment context, the main ones I see. But as a luxury brand, make sure you're keeping track of your inventory. If you have inventory, how
Mhm.
that's being handled. Is inventory missing? Don't overlook it, Warehouses are usually closed, dark places that people don't go to very often. They're havens for that kind of activity. They
Mhm.
can be havens for that type of activity. Tourists aren't
Right.
being there.
That makes sense.
So I do think that you need to be aware of that. And a luxury item is a fast grab. It really is.
Mhm.
And very
Mhm.
tempting to people who have that kind of mentality. So I think to
Mhm.
protect your brand, you need to be aware of all those things and have people in place you trust, you really trust. Being competent does not mean someone is trustworthy. Okay, there's a difference there. Being trustworthy
Right.
does not mean you're competent either, but you need to make sure. And, I think you also need to be aware that dynamics change as people go through life. The person you knew 20, 30 years ago may not be that person anymore. Bad marriage, financial issues, maybe not as successful as you are, problems at home, that's a big one. Mental health,
Mhm.
substance abuse,
Mhm.
all these kinds of things.
Right. All the things, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they can. And, medical issues is another one. Mounting medical bills. You've seen that. The cost of care,
Mhm.
is very expensive,
Mhm.
and not everybody can afford their own private doctor or dentist, or these kinds of things. Or not everybody's fortunate when they call, someone's going to pick up. Maybe it's 3 weeks before you can get in, and so you need to be aware of that and their life circumstances too, to
Yeah.
some degree. So, and get to know your employees. If you get to know your employees, you're going to be much more able. Look, a company that's thousands and thousands of employees, the CEO and the owner can be able to do that. But get to know your employees and get to know the managers of these employees. Really get to know them,
Mhm.
not just check in, not these professional check-ins where you've got a list and you're just going over them like, okay, well, hey, you're telling me what I want to hear. Good. That isn't going to do it. The better managers and employers are the ones who actually know people and have their finger on the pulse of the company
Mhm.
because they're gonna
Mhm.
be able to
Mhm.
detect changes sooner.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's wonderful advice, Hillary. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So, can we shift it a little bit to some online stuff? So, how would you advise public figures on protecting the reputation and intellectual property?
I would advise public figures to do a few things. One, make sure your website is ADA compliant. People miss this all the time. Americans with Disabilities Act, allow everyone and there's a good reason for it, is to allow everyone equal access to things, and that includes your website to view you. These lawsuits have not come yet, but my guess is they will. So you can have a web designer do this. It's easy to do to stay compliant. I think the big part of it, people want to see celebrities. They want to hear what you're doing. They want to see your reels. So if you have photos of yourself, for example, that you're posting, you need to make very clear because what a lot of people will do is, and I've had this happen, they take a photo from a photo, right? And they post it and they
Okay.
use it, they use it, right? Or they use a reel that they're not supposed to. So you need to make clear that on each and every page of your site, for example, that each of these photos are the property of such and such. They're not to be licensed or used or distributed for any reason. There are things with widgets and overlays and things like that that you can do online that make it difficult for someone to, for example, download your image. So if you have if you're representing an action hero, for example, that is doing something, you can, make sure that it's difficult to download or that it's got something in the background when they do. There's ways to do that and make sure that it's saying, this is, you don't have license to do this. You may be getting some cease and desist. It depends on the type of intellectual property. Obviously, if you're in music, you might want to be careful about posting anything online and things like that. Or maybe you want to
Mhm.
post them to your link, for example, to do that. So there's different things there. There's your brand, there's your name, brand, likeness, image, moral rights, and publicity rights. So you need to make sure, but any kind of online presence that you're doing this, that you're not allowing anyone to use that, that they're copyrighted materials, things like that. And you can't. This happens surprisingly often. They have had issues like that
Okay.
where someone will also take a photo of with a celebrity and then they'll post it and try to promote their brand. That kind of thing. They've had that happen. Those kinds of
Mhm.
lawsuits. You need to make clear that someone is actively trolling your social media and other people's social media because it's not so much what's online for you, what you're doing with yours, because you're going to have people on your team who are helping promote those. But the problem is other people are using that, to promote you somewhere else or to promote their product. It's one thing to say, I
Mhm.
saw such and such and I have a selfie. I mean, they expect that, that's kind of one thing. But posting it, obviously, before you take a selfie, it'd be a little tacky for someone to say, "Well, I need you to sign this before you do this." But any kind of intellectual property is likely to be very protected if you're going in, we have these things too before you even go in and pitch an idea, for example. that you're having something signed saying, "This is mine, this is here," anything I'm
Mhm.
sending over, and specifically identify it. You need to make sure that you're identifying what you're saying. I've had this happen where people are talking in a room. There's 4 or 5 people, and they're discussing matters, and they're doing things, and they'll say, "Oh, that wasn't how often have you heard this? Oh, hey, that was my idea, and such went over and made a script real quick and sold it." So you need to make sure. I mean, you can deposit your scripts for sure, but you need to make very clear that this idea is here, and you need to document it yourself. So, for example, say you have a
Mhm.
reel, or say you have a script, or say you have, a song that you whatever it is, or a photo or series. And make sure you're dating it and you're saving them because that's going to be good evidence for you. It's like, well, how do you figure you just created an August 9th when I had this here on January 7th of the same year? Movie, and that's my idea. Okay, well, you might not be.
Oh,
We get that a lot. And celebrities need to be particularly careful because they're particularly at risk saying, that their image, or you said something to these things. So if you're sharing ideas
mhm,
and things like that, what you tell your business manager is not confidential. Okay, that can be used. If you have a publicist and they're helping you, those are not lawyers. If you're going to get a good publicity team, make sure you have one, but know that there are limited things that you can discuss with them under certain things. So you're going to need to talk to your lawyer.
right,
Okay.
right.
You need to be careful about what you're telling. One of the other things I've had is, well, I just told my assistant to do. You'll deal with them. No, I'm not going to deal with your assistant. I'm going to deal with you. Um, Anything you
Mhm,
tell them is not confidential. I have an NDA. It doesn't matter. So those are not confidential things, and those may be in the course of employment. And a lot of these people will go to the tabloids and sell their story. What are you gonna do? You're gonna sue them? Okay. So what?
mhm,
They may not have enough money to make it worthwhile for you, and it's already out. So how often you've heard that the assistant to someone has signed something. So if you're letting
mhm,
these people in the room when you're talking about very sensitive information in legal matters, if anything illegal is going on, like, for example, you drove home drunk, I'm not saying anybody did, or you used a certain amount of drugs, or there's a claim of sexual assault, when they get a subpoena in a civil matter, that's not going to protect you. Okay, so they need to
mhm,
know that. You talk to your lawyer, it's confidential. Talk to your doctor or your therapist, it's confidential too, to some degree. But
mhm,
bear in mind that the more layers, I understand a celebrity is a brand. It is. It becomes you can become a brand and that's what people are there to see. It's not just like in the 50s and 60s where people are just there to see Cary Grant. They're not there to see, they're there to see the brand, the action hero, the beautiful heroine, whatever it is. And that's what they're there to see, but it is a brand now. So they have people, they have publicists, they have agents, they have managers. They have most people have assistants and people help them, and have access to very confidential information. None of this is privileged. It doesn't matter what they
mhm,
sign. You'll never work in this town again can be perceived as a threat and actionable now, whereas that was a very common thing they said before. So they need to be aware of that. And certain things, you're just going to have to keep yourself or privately or discuss with a few people. So,
mhm,
I think it was Elvis where his had this common complaint. Actors, actresses, musicians, artists, they say, "I thought this was a safe place." Okay, you need to make sure it really is. Okay, you need to make sure it really is because it
mhm,
isn't always. So it's good to have your team around you and trusted people, but sometimes that can unfortunately change. So, and an NDA won't always protect you. And I've seen this. It's a common misconception. Well, they'll never work in this town again. Who's just going to sit there and say nothing and keep your secrets are gone.
mhm.
You may have some who do, but here's the reality. If you're doing anything that's inappropriate or you don't want people to know about just for privacy reasons, that's a piece of information that someone now has about you. Always,
Right.
you know, always.
Mhm,
Okay,
mhm.
so
And doesn't go away. That sticks with you for life.
no, it does, and even if you sign an agreement, or how are you gonna enforce that? I mean, there's ways to enforce it. I
Mhm,
think Mel Gibson had a matter where he'd paid an ex-girlfriend for a settlement, and she went on Howard Stern and talked about something and shouldn't, and she had to disgorge things. There's certain things like that, but the reality is this person could discuss it any time, and you don't know if the politics are gonna change.
mhm,
It's
mhm.
become very commonplace that defamation claims and things like that are getting dragged through and harassment claims. are getting dragged through the courts and all kinds of things for years and years and years. And it makes, and as you know, it can make you difficult to get hired. It can make difficult for your brand,
Yeah.
particularly if you have a certain image. So you need to be very aware of these things. And the reality is, if you're a celebrity or in the public eye for any reason, you're to some degree held to a higher standard. It's not you can just do whatever you want. Not in any way suggesting anybody has that attitude, but I think there's the perception. And there's also the perception of celebrities that they don't think the rules apply to them and those kinds of things. So you need to do yourself a favor and protect yourself against that. Because if you don't, and you don't take a pretty aggressive stance on that, it could be a real problem later.
Absolutely. So tell me, give us one last little takeaway that we can take away from this. Any tips or words of advice that you could give the audience in just protecting themselves? Like if you could give the golden nugget of golden nuggets, what would you say?
I think you need to have a list, one page, a list of what you need to do, and you need to refer to it constantly. You should have a check-in with yourself and your business. So have a list like insurance, brand ID, inventory, asset protection. You need to have it not a novel. Anything they say if you can have a trial, you can reduce it to one page, which you can. And so you need to have that one page. You need to have it somewhere, that reminds you of them because it's going to remind you of your main goals.
Mhm.
And it's not a goal list, but you need to have a list of the things that we talked about to protect yourself, how the employee is doing on one page. And you need to refer to it at least quarterly. I recommend monthly. Do that to
Mhm.
help yourself stay on track because when you're busy and life happens or you have kids or, you're merging or a breakup or whatever it is, you're going to forget those sometimes. It's not that you don't know you need to do it. It's that there's
Sure.
so many other things going on. They need to and keep
Mhm.
good records. So have that list, keep it in your drawer, keep it to yourself, check in with it. That's you don't need a complex big thing of paper for a business plan. You can to go into markets, but it's got to be reduced to one
Mhm.
page. If you can reduce that to one page and refer to it, do your check-ins, stay on track that way. And make sure you enforce it. But I mean, you got to remind yourself. I don't mean just glance and go, okay, yeah, I saw it. I mean, make sure you're doing that. I think that's the best advice I could give.
Thanks for listening to Lux Talk, where faith leads, luxury inspires, and life is elevated. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, and share it with someone navigating all things luxury. For more luxury insights, market education, and elevated conversations, follow Lux Talk, turn on notifications, and join us for what's coming next. Stay elevated, stay informed, and stay connected with Lux Talk.